The second speaker of the post-lunch session is Dr. Samata Biswas, Department of English, Sanskrit College and University, Kolkata. And Dr. Biswas will be speaking on women and urban spaces, some thoughts in the wake of Meyera, Raat, Dokhol, Koro, Women Reclaim the Night. Dr. Biswas, a warm welcome, and you can please start with your presentation.
Yes, so I shall share my PowerPoint. I hope you will be able to see it. Uh, give me a few minutes to set this up. Okay. Okay, can you see this now?
Yes, it is visible.
Also, I'm going to change the slide and see whether you continue to see it. Can you see the change slide?
Yes, it is
Okay,
visible.
excellent. So I'm very happy to be here. Several reasons. One is I see Anuradhadi in the audience, in the group, and this is a lecture that I developed last year when Anuradhadi had invited me to her college. And I've since worked on this, but that was the moment which led me to engage more fully with the question of women in urban spaces. That's the first reason. Second is because I'm following from Devaroti, and Devaroti has asked some of the questions that I will be asking myself. I'm extremely familiar with this work that Devaroti presented. I was the respondent to this paper when she developed this, and I've also later on worked with Tuktuki Mondol myself. So it also probably, maybe that is what also shows why we are going to be asking similar questions. But my work is not ethnographic in the sense that implies visiting a field and speaking to people. But in certain senses, it is ethnographic, as in it is an auto-ethnography. I am also looking at my own participation in this very, very provocatively titled and yet very exciting moment in our contemporary history, Raat Dokhol Kora, and the way the narratives around it have played out. So I am taking this moment of Raat Dokhol Kora and placing it in the context of my considerations about women and urban spaces in India. And apologies also, Anuradhadi, because 30% or 40% of what you're going to hear today is something you have heard before. And also thank you to Lady Brabourne College for inviting me. I have been there many a times, and I wish I could go back many a times again. So with that, I will just begin. So let me share with you a couple of posters, e-posters or flyers created on Canva or on Photoshop, calling women of Bengal to reclaim the night. I do not have to give you the context of this call. You know this. It was in the aftermath of the horrific rape and murder of a young woman doctor at night in her workplace in a government hospital in Kolkata. This protest, scheduled for the night of 14th August on the eve of India's independence day, began with the first poster on the left, just a couple of places, 3 places actually, in the metropolis Kolkata, Jadavpur Academic College Street. And if you are from Kolkata or familiar with Kolkata, you know that Jadavpur and College Street are usually the spaces where any protest gathering takes place. Academy also because it has the Ranu Chaya Mancho, so it's easier to perform outside in the open, and Academy as also a space where people associated with the entertainment field are most familiar with and comfortable with. Jadavpur and College Street similarly spaces where students congregate and gather. So the organizers, although right now there's a little bit of a dispute about who gave the original call, anyway, then the coherent group of organizers said, women reclaim the night. The organizers were some women and queer activists from different walks of life, students, civil society actors, teachers, publishers, etc. They also made the blank template of the poster available for people to put in their own dates, times, and locations. And what happened after that is history. So before this moment, 14th August, 11:55 p.m., I was collating the list of spaces and the list and places where the take back, reclaim the night protests are going to happen. And I had 110 places, of which 100 in West Bengal itself, and then in various big cities across the world, but also across India. Across Bengal, in more than 100 places, women and men stepped out of their homes, walked to the nearest spot, some on foot, some on private vehicles, others on whatever they could find. They sang, chanted, shouted, danced, performed. One more such event was scheduled on 4th September night, the day before the scheduled date of the hearing at the Supreme Court. But we know that later the Supreme Court hearing was postponed because the Chief Justice was on leave. We thought, a lot of us thought, that there won't be that many people for this second 4th September call to reclaim the night, but we were mistaken. There were once again thousands of people. And what I noticed this second time was that there were many more autonomous groups of people, mostly women, walking around the streets of Calcutta, because we were traveling with a photographer from different parts, uh, two different parts of Calcutta, between Shambhajar and College Street and Hathibagan and Academy and Jadavpur. And there were random groups of people at 11:30 p.m., at 12 p.m. walking, shouting some sorts of slogans that we are all familiar with. And they were mostly groups of women, which is something in all these years of my living and working in Calcutta and often going out to reclaim the night on my own, I had never witnessed. So something new was taking place. Now we know that this reclamation of the night or taking back of the night is a well established way of raising awareness against sexual violence across the world. The first recorded event, organized and attended only by women, was held in London in 1877. Since the 1970s, various places in Europe and America regularly host such events. And since the anti-rape protests in Delhi in 2012, after the very violent rape and murder of Nirbhaya, so does India. So I have shared two more posters. There is the 2015 Take Back the Night uh, poster in Delhi, in which people are invited to loiter, sing, and dance together. And the Women Walk at Midnight, which is an ongoing movement of people walking in different parts of Delhi at midnight, organized by an artist called Mrinal Pandey. So then this reclaim the night or take back the night is not something that is happening anew. It is well within the established tradition of feminist mobilization, feminist need to occupy public spaces. So from this, I take this as a point to enter into what is my consideration about women in urban spaces in India, with a photo of India's wrestlers who we know very well, right? Especially the one in the middle. This is a photo of the Indian wrestlers who had been doing a sit-in protest demonstration at Jantar Mantar in New Delhi for almost a month last year. If you have not been to New Delhi, you are still familiar with Jantar Mantar, because many of the protests that we see taking place in Delhi, especially the occupation, the sit-in demonstrations, the dharnas, take place in Jantar Mantar. I do not know whether we have all read Arundhati Roy's The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. In The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, Roy provides 3-4 pages to describe what the space of Jantar Mantar is like. And she talks about how at any given point of time during any given day, there are 10, 20 different protests going on. It could be a random person sitting with a placard for days on end. It could be a bunch of people. It could be some people who are being paid attention to, who are in the media glare. Most people who are absent from the media glare. But Jantar Mantar is the site where protest is often launched. So when we talked about reclaiming the night in Kolkata, we talked about two specific spaces, Jadavpur and College Street. Each, we know, has a very strong history of being sites of protest. For College Street was the space of freedom movement. College Street was the space of communist movement. it was the space of the Naxalite movement, and now in the reclaiming of the night movement, we find College Street once again is such a space. Exactly like that is Jantar Mantar, except that unlike College Street, since it is not necessarily a busy intersection, there are more people sitting with their specific demands. But this goes on to show that to be out in the public, to occupy space with our body, is an established mode of protesting for and against things. So why were the boxers protesting? We know this extremely, extremely well. Why were the wrestlers protesting? Sorry. They are all internationally acclaimed wrestlers who have won uh, awards for India in different fora. They have been on the dharna because they demanded inquiry of and punishment of the president of the Boxing Federation of India, whose name we also know very well right now, Brijbhushan Charan Singh, who was accused of having sexually harassed athletes, including a minor. I use this image deliberately because I want us to take a minute to think about the all pervasiveness of sexual harassment and gender violence directed at women, how physical power cannot be what makes women vulnerable, and how women need to and historically have occupied public spaces to make their voices heard, though we are not always comfortable in doing so. So this is an image from 2023. This is an image from 1970s. This is also doing exactly what we are doing today, protesting against rape, protesting against violence on women, against gender-based violence, against uh, sexual harassment of different kinds and different fora. And if you know, and I'm sure you know, our history of women's movements in India, anti-rape protests have been one of the cornerstones of women's movements of all kinds in India, and they have also led to major legislative reforms, be it the rape of Bhamri Devi or the rape of Mathura or the rape of Ramiza B, or much more recently the rape of Nirbhaya, which have all led to major legislative demands, reforms. But these reforms don't come in the wake of the event itself. They come in the wake of the protests surrounding these events. And each of these protests have been out in the public, occupying public spaces in various imaginative, militant, vocal, vociferous ways. This is, as I said, a photo from the anti-rape protests in Delhi in the 1970s. Seems we are still doing the same thing 50 years later, vocally occupying the streets with our bodies. Before we go any further, I must also remember that when we are talking about us occupying the streets with our bodies, women reclaiming the nights, I of course mean that there are many, that women contains the category of trans women and anybody who identifies as female. I also know that there are many differences between women along the lines of caste, religion, gender, class, race, sexuality. This question of differences will become more important when we rethink who gets to claim or reclaim the night and whose claim is not so strong. I'll request you to do a thought exercise. We've done this before in Anuradha's college also, but still bear with me. Let us imagine a street we know, perhaps a street we walk on every day to on our way to college or university. Now let us imagine the people on those streets. Who are these people? What are they doing? Where are they going? Are they waiting idly by the side of the road? Do they live on the road? Are they playing on the road? What are they playing? What is their gender? Who are the majority? And this person who's thinking this, what is our gender? How do I walk on the road? Does walking on the road, getting on a bus or the local train, the metro or the taxi, the shared auto, the rickshaw, the toto, differ according to my gender? What are the other genders that I know of? Is it different from them? Now, of course, I'm not going to ask you about what you imagined because that would be too time consuming. and also because we can all already predict some of those answers. Despite the many differences between places, between cities and towns and villages, localities and neighborhoods, we know our answer is going to be the same. We can imagine some bits of this which are considered quintessentially Bengali, and we are in Bengal after all. Say para cricket. Imagine a holiday in winter or a Sunday morning or even the Independence Day. Imagine the road in many Calcutta neighborhoods at around 11 a.m. I am lazily scrolling through my social media page and I hear loud noises outside my window. I look out and a bunch of boys, young men, middle-aged men, are playing gully cricket. In less numbers, but still, sometimes they even play football. Now, is there anything unusual about it? Is there anything at all unusual and unfair about this? Do girls not want to play? What stops them from playing? What discourages them from playing? And for our specific purpose, what discourages them from playing on the roads? So let's take this question one step further. What is women's relationship with public spaces in Indian cities? Do women occupy the urban spaces the same way that men do? If they do not, what is the difference? Are cities more hostile to women and people of different gender identities than they are to men? If yes, why? And probably these questions will lead us to answer what was the need to reclaim the night. Now, people who pay attention to urban spaces argue that public space is not gender neutral. They also further argue that the term gender neutrality is actually something that stands in for patriarchal or what benefits men. I agree with this, that public spaces are not gender neutral. Let us think of a few axes along which we can map these differentials. Political voice. Do women in cities have any political voice? Do they have access to land, security of tenure, housing? Do they have access to infrastructure and services? And to this, I will add a further question. When does infrastructure become hostile towards women? And what are the livelihood opportunities? What questions of safety and security must a city navigate in order to make its women feel safe? So we will only have a question. We will only look at three of those, which I have highlighted: access to housing, access to infrastructure and services, and safety and security. Let us begin with housing. In urban spaces, women usually do not own property. It is the same in rural spaces. The National Family Health Survey number 5 found that 22.7% women in Delhi independently or co-own a house or property. The highest percentage of women who own or co-own property can be found in Karnataka. It is 67%, 68%. The national average is 43.3%, and in West Bengal it's only 22%. And this includes owning a house either alone or jointly. This, we must agree, is an abysmal situation. But data also shows that in most cases, it is increasing not because women are becoming financially more independent. They are, but that is not directly leading to them owning more property. It is increasing due to a change in succession laws, not simply because of economic independence. If we, and this is only the question of ownership. Access to housing does not merely mean owning a house. It also means renting. If we think of housing situations in urban cities, we know that landlords are less likely to rent out accommodation to just women. And in the instances that they do, women are kept under strict vigil, moral policing, and not allowed to have male guests. Data from Delhi shows us that homeless women in Delhi are often in the streets because they could not get family housing as a result of being ignorant about succession laws. Homeless people often spend generations on the street. We just listened to Devarati, who talked about 3 generations of Tuktuki's family which have been living on the street. There are recorded interviews in Chennai about third generation homeless women. In Calcutta, we are one step forward. We don't even call them homeless. We call the pavement or the footpath to be their homes. So our preferred term for people who live on the pavement is pavement dwellers or street dwellers, footpathbashi বা footpath nibashi. Interestingly, some of the first women to hold property in Calcutta were the sex workers. I urge everyone to watch this excellent film by Nirantar Trust called Sex Work and the City, in which they show the important role the sex workers in colonial Calcutta played in the way real estate was organized in the city. Another very important landowner of old Calcutta was Rani Rashmoni, who we all know as the patron and disciple of Ramakrishna Paramhansha. But these are exceptions. Access to housing in urban spaces increasingly does not only mean ownership, because you have more and more women entering the city for education and for employment. So it also means renting. And in the context of big cities like Calcutta, Delhi, Bombay, or Bangalore, it also means housing for the huge number of women and girls who come for employment and education. Where do they stay? I'll give you an example of employment. We are all very proud that India is now one of the spaces which is manufacturing the iPhone, right? The manufacturing hub is close to Chennai in Tamil Nadu. But if you hear about the people who work there, who are primarily women, they are kept in company provided housing facilities, but their movement is so strictly regulated that they can't even take holidays for going and visiting their families, or if they're feeling sick. So uh, thankfully this year the Tamil Nadu government has stepped in and built accessible and affordable housing for these women workers in iPhone factories themselves, where women's movement is much less regulated. But we know working women are not students. Even their movement gets regulated in working women's hostels, in paying guest accommodations, in houses that they rent themselves. The iPhone factory is just one example. So all of these women and girls who increasingly are coming to the cities to study and to work, where do they stay? Do they have the same kind of access to rented property and paying guest accommodations and hostels as men do? If yes, are the rules the same? Are they safe and secure in their accommodations? Last year, in my master's class, I conducted a small ethnographic survey of students who have moved to the city of Calcutta for higher education. Students interviewed each other. Students who commute daily interviewed people who have moved to the city. And we mixed up the genders. Often women interviewed men, or men interviewed women, or women interviewed women. But across board, in my sample size of around 25 people, the difference between men's experience of paying guest accommodation or hostel was starkly different from women's experience of paying guest accommodation and hostel. Why is it so? Number one, surveillance. Number two, sexual harassment. Number three, all kinds of moral policing. Irrespective of how bad the man's occupation accommodation was, he was never subjected to any of these three things which were unique to the woman's experience of living in a PG or a hostel in the big city. Apart from that, what was common for everybody? Unhygienic living conditions and food. Now, this also takes us to thinking about what are the socially acceptable reasons for which women are in the city. Presence of women in the public space is a contested subject in most societies, and the society in India, especially in Calcutta, is not an anomaly. Throughout the 19th century, whenever the question of women's education came up, women also had to resolve the tension between their essential femininity, and that was centered on home, and the public role that they were increasingly encouraged to play. Some examples come to mind. In women's schools, girls had to be taken to school in palanquins. পালকিতে করে মেয়েদেরকে স্কুলে নিয়ে যাওয়া হতো, সেটা সিস্টার নিবেদিতা স্কুলেও নিয়ে যাওয়া হতো। Bethune school, women were taken to both Sister Nivedita school as well as to Bethune school in palanquins. Lest unrelated men see them and thereby breach the parda. But we also have to remember that these restrictions were for middle and upper middle class, dominant caste Hindu and Muslim women, for whom most of the 19th century reforms of the so-called Bengal Renaissance were directed. We can also think about Rabindranath Tagore's early 20th century novel, Ghore Baire, or The Home and the World, written in the backdrop of the Swadeshi movement, which also talks about the complications associated with women from the Antapur, or the inner world, entering the Bahir, that is occupying, embracing public roles. During the nationalist movement, more and more women from dominant families entered the public domain, both through revolutionary activism and communist parties, but also in large numbers in Gandhian movements. Now, remember, this becomes an issue for dominant and upper class and upper caste women, which, according to Partha Chatterjee, leads to what is understood as the nationalist resolution of the women's question, which eventually enables women's access to public spaces like employment, education. Women could venture into the public because ideologically they were confined to the private. But Dalit and poor women were already occupying city streets as cooks, as ayahs, as factory workers, and more importantly, as sex workers. I refer here to those public women, the Beshas, and remember another word for a sex worker is a public woman, the Besha, the Barbonita, the courtesan, or the Tawaif, who occupy public spaces in the 18th and 19th centuries and continue to do so. Historically, women were forced into sex work, and only a minuscule number who choose to get into it. They have both been migrants to the city, shifting as the city shifts, as its functions and centers move. After Calcutta was established and it became a center for merchants and traders, and as the rural economy shrunk, more and more women came to the city as sex workers. She is constructed against the Bhadra Mohila, who stays within the house and is educated. The sex worker, on the other hand, does not have education. She was initially in the 18th century moving alongside the garrison. So as the armed forces would move, the sex workers would also move. The garrison and the sex worker quarters moved. The shape of the city also shifted. Even today, the city is marked by the presence of sex workers' quarters in Kalighat, in Sonagachi, and near the dock. The presence of sex workers in the public space defies the acceptable reasons. Sorry, I should have been in the previous slide. Defies the acceptable reasons why women are supposed to occupy public spaces, education and employment. But we have just discussed, even when women occupy public spaces for education and employment, and you remember that the young doctor at Arjikor was doing both of those. She was in a public space, which is her workspace, for education and employment. They can be extremely, extremely hostile spaces. So women have to clearly demonstrate their purpose for using the public spaces. Like they are going to a job or going home or to school or to college or to a store. But for sex workers, their work is public. Waiting for hours on city streets and corners, in alleyways and at the doors, this is something that the city is not used to. So the city, in the city, unaccompanied women are often confused or mistaken as sex workers, which is what the Tuktukis had also happened in Tuktuki's case, as Devarati told us. So women are not expected to be outside on the street aimlessly moving about, which is why in Why Loiter, Shilpa Phadke argues that loitering is a radical way of reclaiming public spaces, like sleeping in public parks, sitting around in parks, not really doing anything, being aimless. This is a radical act because we continue to believe women are the denizens of the home and men occupy the world. How do we define loiter? How to ensure women access to public spaces of leisure and recreation as much as men do? Remember, we had talked about men playing football and cricket on the city streets as a mode of leisure, recreation, exercise, whiling away the time. Increasingly, as newer and newer generations of students come to our classes and we conduct the same discussion about gender and we ask them, what sports did you play? I know that my generation women, nobody played cricket or football or even volleyball or basketball. Maybe one person played basketball. In this generation, the new batch that joined this year, most of them have at some point of time played cricket or football, but none of them have played cricket or football outside on the streets, just as their brothers or their classmates are doing. So in some ways, women are having greater access, but in some senses, the lack of access, especially to public life of the city, remains the as it was before. So in this Why Loiter project, Shilpa Phadke and her colleagues, they regularly go to parks to sleep. They hang about aimlessly. They chat uh, on the roads, in tea stalls, all spaces which are very much marked by the absence of women. Although we find women working in these spaces. So the tea stall may be a woman-run tea stall. The park may have a vendor who is a woman, but women who just simply wait there without any demonstrable reason, just as men do in city parks and street corners, according to Shilpa Phadke, is a radical act and which must be practiced. So I have studied for many years in Hyderabad, next to the Osmania University. And in Osmania University, we often saw scores of young men sitting and studying under the trees. They were all preparing for some kind of civil service examination. Now, we were asking ourselves, did the scores of young men uh, always become civil servants by studying under the trees in the public parks? And we were also asking, where are the women students of this university? Don't they study? Where do they study? Now, exactly 10 years ago, one evening, responding to the call of something called the Hyderabad for Feminism Facebook page, some of us went to loiter, and I'm using this word loiter deliberately because that is exactly what we wanted to do. We went to loiter in Osmania University. There was my friend and I, someone else from the same campus I had never met, another woman who had given the call, and one man. We sat and chatted, and all the while we were acutely aware of the hostile gaze directed at us. We were marked by our gender, but more importantly, we were also marked by our class. Because the people who were occupying those public spaces, although men, were never of a class that is similar to ours. And I'm going to use this in a few minutes to enter into my discussion of how reclaiming in the night must be viewed from the perspective of class as much as it needs to be viewed from the perspective of gender. Now, even in Calcutta and other big cities, we don't find unaccompanied women loitering. But as this photo will show you, which this is from Singapore last year, once it became mandatory for Singapore householders to give their domestic workers 1 day's leave and every week, and the domestic workers had nowhere to go because they did not have enough money to spend after sending all their money back to their homes in Philippines or various other places, they started occupying Singapore streets. They would sing, dance, give each other food, braid each other's hair, in general, make a space which has been hostile to them all along because they have been confined inside the home, theirs only for one afternoon a week. But that, one could argue, has a radical potential of making the nature of the space change drastically. Whether or not, only time will tell. Now, access to public spaces also implies access to infrastructure and services. We are familiar with the instances of the pink ticket in Delhi. The Delhi government introduced the pink ticket, which is ticketless travel on government buses in Delhi from 2019 onwards. This is a model that has been replicated by Tamil Nadu in 2021 and Karnataka in 2023, which goes to show that it must be an extremely successful model. Now, how does it become a successful model? Lots of people said that poverty is something that is irrespective of gender, and therefore why should women be the beneficiaries of ticketless travel when men, poor men, are not becoming the beneficiary of that thing. But we should see what have been the advantages of the free bus ride since 2019. Delhi has around 1 crore women. The pink ticket has been used 100 crore times in the past 4 years. Studies found that women's bus use went up by 25%, 28%, and finally 33% in 3 consecutive years. Where are all those women going? Women who have been interviewed claim that this has helped them travel more safely than before and save time, as well as save money. We also have to remember the more women are on the streets, the safer it is for everyone else. This also positively acknowledges women's participation in the labor force. So how does this work? How does making public transport free for women help women and others? First, it encourages more women to avail public transport. Second, therefore, women can be out for longer and go to multiple places during their day. Third, it is well known that even when women are not formally employed in remunerative labor, they still do all kinds of work, such as cooking, cleaning, going to the grocery store, taking and bringing children back from school. They may be taking less distant trips in the city, but their trips might be more frequent. Free public transport enables them to carry these works out. It is also safer for women and others when more women are out for longer and in more spaces. Perhaps the success of the scheme is that now subsequent governments in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka have replicated this very successful model. But so transport is one kind of infrastructure which women must have access to and more in order for them to be safely inducted into public life. But the second one, and in no way less important, is sanitation. While people were planning to reclaim the night protest, or if you go back to Paramita Vora's 2006 film Q2P, in which Vora documents of Take Back the Night protests in Bombay, one of the central concerns, apart from transport, was sanitation. How will all of these women staying outside in the night use sanitary facilities? There are two answers to this. I will talk about the first one first. The first one from my perspective. So as the Reclaim the Night protest was being organized on College Street, we started worrying about this and we wrote about it on Facebook and we tried to understand how public sanitary facilities work and when do they work. So from when till when? We went to College Square. The person who runs the facility said he will shut the facility at 9 unless we can bring a letter from the counselor, which we couldn't, so it was shut at night. Eventually, students at Kolkata Medical College said that their hostels will be accessible to everyone. And Pratik Khan, the bookshop and publisher, they also kept their shop open till the next morning. But the same College Street that I had gone to reclaim, is also home to other people. This is right in front of my university on Bankim Chatterjee Street. So as we are walking towards reclaiming the night on College Street, we find these households created on vans with mosquito nets and tarpaulin and also random clothes. And you see one woman sitting on the road, just as there are men behind her holding candles going to reclaim the night, right? So I am going to reclaim a night in a space where women are already present in the night. So how does my or people like my participation in the reclamation of night change their lives? I had to ask myself, whose night was I reclaiming, and did my reclamation make it better for people far less privileged than me? Cities are colonial projects, at least modern cities are, like Calcutta. They were planned to keep certain distinctions in mind. The distinction between the native and the white, the elite and the poor, the distinction for us in the post-colonial city, the division is manifold. There is, of course, the division between those who have homes and those who do not have homes. But also in the definition of home, and their access to sanitation, there are so many layers. People who live in shanties and therefore are not considered homeless still do not have access to safe sanitation. Women in slums do not have access to safe and sanitation. Women who live in pavements and on platforms have to either relieve themselves in the open or have to use very unhygienic and congested public utilities. This opens up new avenues of violence and violation. So this is on College Street. The College Square public utility shuts at 9 p.m. So all these women who live here, where do they go when those public utilities shut? That is a question in my quest, and or rather our quest of reclaiming in the night, we were not very willing to ask. And it is not only something that happens to women who are cis women, it is also something that marginalizes trans women. The toilet is something that doubly marginalizes trans women and trans men, because for trans women, while they aren't always allowed to access toilets marked for women, they face immense violence when they use men's toilets. For trans men, if they can at all access men's toilets, those are unsafe. Using women's toilets stand against the recognition that they have been fighting for their whole lives. So this is also something since sanitation is part of infrastructure and infrastructure is part of public spaces, this is one of the instances of hostile infrastructure. You have sanitation, but you have it only for a limited number of people. You have it for a group of people. You have it only for limited periods of time, or you have inadequate sanitation facilities. Instances of hostile infrastructure can be many. Spaces that are not well lit, spaces that are difficult to navigate, and spaces which are just impossible to reach. Poor connectivity through public transport and poor access to public toilets impact how women can move across the city. These increase harassment and in general limit women's participation in public life. We often have students who bunk the last couple of hours of classes because after they get off the train near their home, the road connecting the station and the home are either deserted or it gets dark very quickly. So these girl students do not feel safe enough to go there after the daylight recedes. Homeless women are also, like these women, are also open to many layers of violence. Those who live on the streets are often considered to be sex workers and solicited by men. They are the subject of taunts and jibes by many passerby. Men might lie down next to them at night or pull their hands. Open defecation, which is often practiced by pavement dwellers, since the toilet amenities may be far away or may be closed for night or may be too expensive to use, lead to sexual violence. Even during the lockdown, there were reports of young girls being raped when they went some distance away to relieve themselves. Lack of privacy is another concern. Intimate moments, sanitation, everything is undertaken in full public glare. So when we undertake a very liberatory exercise of reclaiming the night, we have to ask ourselves constantly, does it help all women? And second, does all forms of reclaiming spaces get celebrated? I will end with two examples. I'm sure, but before that, just one thing that I'm going to forget if I don't talk about it now. Some people were not allowed to reclaim the night. This is the instance of Jai Bhim Nagar in Mumbai, which is an OBC, mostly OBC and Muslim basti, which was demolished. And they wanted to participate in the Reclaim the Night protest organized by the housing complex next to them. Because they said that we are the ones who lie on the road out at night. We should also get the night that is our own. The housing complex did not allow them. So even when we are claiming to reclaim the night, who do we consider to be our friends, those who are with us? Who are we extending solidarity towards, and whose solidarity are we not willing to accept? That is something we have to think about. I will end by these two examples that I was talking about. You are familiar with both of these images. The left one is from Shaheen Bagh and the right one is from Narmada Bachao Andolan. I'm sure that all of us are aware of the junior doctors' occupation of the space in front of Shastro Bhavan. They started last Monday night, and throughout the night there were repeated requests for portable loos, bio toilets. Next morning, the loos were in place. Several restaurants had opened their doors for those who had assembled. A private university opened its doors, as did a prominent political party. Right? Now, the image on the left is of the women who had congregated at Shaheen Bagh uh, in 2020 in the wake of the NRC CAA protests. Similar occupation of the night and the public space was going on in Calcutta's Park Circus Maidan. Women who had congregated there had been asking for bio toilets for 10 days. Only after 10 days, they were given permission to procure bio toilets and put it in Park Circus Maidan. In the case of the junior doctors' protests in Shastra Bhavan, no such permission was required, no time was lost. So when we think about people's access to public spaces and their right to occupy public spaces, which claims are we more amenable to? Whose occupation is enough? Whose occupation is celebrated? And whose occupation is already seen through a hostile lens? The second example on the right is of the Narmada Bachao Andolan. We have all grown up learning about the Narmada Bachao Andolan, where women and men sought to occupy the water itself, the water that was going to submerge their homes. Again, we know the results of the Narmada Bachao Andolan were not good for these women. So when we think about protests that are based on occupying public space in the name of a community, be it the community of women, reclaiming the night, which I have enthusiastically been participating in, and I think it is a great liberatory moment for many like us, but also many others who had never participated in protests or been outside of home for that long a period without male companions. We also have to remember there are certain parts of our identity which makes this an available medium of protest for us, which does not invite the state's wrath or the wrath of other parties which are not aligned with us. Sometimes our ideological position, sometimes our political position, sometimes the mere fact that we are against the state's big developmental project does not make the occupation a successful one. With this, I shall end. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamata ma'am, for this wonderful, excellent presentation. I would like to request the participants to post their comments, or if you have any questions, you can post them too.
uh, Posting it because I'm on the move in a vehicle.
Hi, Anuradha, we can hear you.
Oh, Acha, okay. Thank you, Shamuta, for responding. I was just asking, I mean, first of all, it was very interesting, as usual, and as I expected, Shamuta. Uh, but there is one thing that I would like to know your opinion about, which is, like, when I went out to join the Michil, the Reclaim the Night Michil in Behala, I found, I mean, of course, there were thousands of women around, and yet there were thousands of men too. Okay, so at a point of time, it came to pass that, the men being taller, they had moved ahead and they were occupying the space that women were supposed to be occupying to such an extent that we literally, some of us had to shout and had to make ourselves heard. We said, Dada, apnara jodi ekটু side দেন তাহলে আমরা এগোই. So the irony of the whole situation also hit me very hard on that night, on the night of 14th of August, that, how is it that here are thousands of women. I mean, I welcome the intentions of the men who joined, but don't you think that even on such nights, women in many places were kind of marginalized, or rather pushed to the margins, because there were so many men around, holding placards? This is my first observation. And the second observation is, like, don't you think that these kinds of movements also, let's say, uh, act as a cover for men who, on different occasions, have uh, teased women on the streets themselves. Because these were two realizations which hit me hard, because I was there for about, 3 hours or so. Um, and, I noticed the crowd that kept on swelling. And these are the 2 points uh, that I really observed. So I would like to know your take on these two. Thank you.
Anuradhati, I agree 100%. Yes, there have been. I did not know about Behala, but I definitely know about Jadavpur, where there have been molestation during the Take Back the Reclaim the Night protests. There have been drunk people misbehaving with women, rubbing them, feeling them up. Uh, yes, and also that there have been known abusers who have been present in various such protests. Having said, having agreed to both of these, but I have also witnessed a change. Change. What is the change that I have witnessed? And we've been discussing this for a bit. So I'm confident that my observations are not mine alone. There are several people who are sharing my observations. Number one, uh, although the charge of reclaim the night in various big spaces like Behala or Jadavpur, even on College Street, but maybe not so much on College Street, were often uh, overtaken by men in smaller spaces. For example, I came across this video again from one of our colleagues, Amrita Chakraborty, who teaches in a suburban college. Near the Noihati station at 9 p.m., hundreds of women gathered and they were shouting slogans, and they were not gathering out of some prior plan. They happened to be daily commuters. They were coming back from their workplaces. A few gathered and the others gathered. What I witnessed on the fourth night, uh, across Calcutta, I saw groups of 3, 4, 5 women, maybe one man, maybe two men, 6 women, maybe just 4, 5 women, walking to different points in which women have congregated or men have congregated or the protests are going on, shouting slogans by themselves. They do not have any quote unquote protection. So while yes, there has been considered attempt by men as always to occupy spaces which are meant for women, there have also been women fighting back against it. In terms of what is now known as whitewashing the abusers because they have participated in a protest, I will remind you of the instance of the Pother Dabi Michil, which happened, I think, 3 weeks ago. Huge Michil from College Street to Dharmatala, in which several well-known abusers had also said that they are going to join. And series of women wrote to the organizers and said that they are not welcome. And these abusers were asked to not be participating in this instance. Now, often we are not in a position to approach the organizers. Often we are not in a position to tell people that this is not how these people are well-known people, these people have molested or harassed or abused women in their life. But when they are, uh, I think this moment has given at least some women the impetus to call other people out, to let other people know that your colleagues are not welcome in this space. And the organizers, given the sheer volume and power of these women's mobilization, have had to concede. They have had to tell the abusers, no, don't be part of this. You are not welcome here. So this has also been happening. So in my feeling is that in a popular sort of mobilization, there will be, especially in public space, there will be thousands of people of all dispensations. But are we at least managing to create a space in which some of these conversations can take place? I think partially yes. But we are also managing to create this space because of our class position and because of our cultural privilege. If we were other people, not of the class and caste which is primarily present in this kind of mobilization, I don't know whether our conversations would have been as fruitful.
Yes, yes, I get your point, Shamata, and I also agree to what you said. I wasn't. I must say that I wasn't aware of the latter protest that you spoke of, the Pothe Dabi Michil, where I somehow missed the point that that the organizers were kind of compelled to ask certain well-known, abusers not to be part of them. But thank you for the information. It was wonderful listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha ma'am, for the question. Any other questions?
Moa, I have, no,
Yes,
I
yes,
have,
yes, Srimoidi, please, please.
yes, first of all, thank you very much for this lovely presentation and highly enriching. Just a small query to you, that uh, is from the perspective of public policy. Uh, if we take a glimpse of the focus of the public policy meant for women, particularly empowerment of women, we find that state is more and more concerned with the issues like livelihood and say skill development and so on and so forth. But in my experience, while we work as a researcher or not even, if not as a researcher, just as a woman while accessing the public space, in my experience, that this aspect of women's right to public space, this is not paid importance in the public policy. Even if we take a look at the national empowerment policy, where we find that some general concerns, some general issues are being emphasized. But specifically, we find that this very important issue, that where we are not getting equal access. Say, for example, it's my experience that when going to the field for my research, my colleague, just because as a male researcher, getting access very easily to the public spaces, so the collection of data can get over in the tea stalls, in the particularly, I mean, it's in the rural areas. But I had to work hard to get access over there, and therefore definitely it acts as a setback to a researcher. So I just want to know from you, how do you look at the public policy, this hierarchy of issues from this particular perspective?
I think that unfortunately post-colonial nations don't really take access to anybody's access to public space very carefully, right? We don't think about, for example, you all remember that during the COVID-19 lockdowns, one of the first public spaces to be shut down were the parks, where people go for free access to air and healthy air and for exercise. The So it is because the public good is not considered to be for the public. Parks are to be protected, they are to be shut down. Monuments are hostile, they are covered with barbed wire so that people can't sit in those spaces. There are more and more increasing instances of hostile architecture in which park benches have a rod within in the middle so that nobody can lie down on it. We have all seen, especially if you're in Calcutta, you have all seen that private households have their rock, right? And the rock is covered in either alcatraz or the I don't know what is that black thick substance is called, or some small stones so that no one can sit there. And for the differently abled, even when ramps are made, they are so steep that a wheelchair cannot go up those ramps. So in general, public policy in post-colonial states, especially in South Asia, does not really care about public's access to the public spaces. Having said that, there are pockets of public space, especially when it is at the intersection of what is ruled by the what is state given and what is privately created. So a space like a tea stall, which could also be on, let's say, a railway station, on a railway platform. So the railway platform would be a government space, and the tea stall created on that is a slightly different kind of a space. all these spaces have historically been spaces meant for and earmarked for men. These public gathering, going to meetings, having conversations in public have been spaces meant for men. So then policy which wants to increase people's access to public spaces cannot be gender neutral, because public spaces have historically been men's spaces, masculine spaces. So then what we have to do, at least from a policy perspective, policy has to encourage women's participation in public spaces by creating infrastructurally, architecturally, space-wise, amenities-wise, spaces which are better for women. So why is it that more middle-class women hang out in malls than they hang out in parks? It's more expensive to hang out in a mall to have a cold drink, but because there are big clean toilets that they can access, as opposed to in parks where they cannot access anything. So public spaces then have to be designed keeping in mind the different ways in which women and men occupy public spaces, and keeping in mind that women have historically had less access. So the policy cannot be gender neutral. The policy has to be skewed in favor of women so that women can then have enhanced access in public spaces. That's what I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samata ma'am. Thank you, Srimoyidi, for the